In this section, we're going to talk about how to put it all together, how to start configuring different platforms for your particular needs, whether it's a complete video broadcast or if it's audio only or whatever you're doing. We're going to give you some simple breakdowns of how to set things up and the gear you'll need specifically for those platforms. Now, Harold's going to come in and talk a little bit about our first platform.
Yeah, as Rick said, there are quite a few different ways you can make your setups for streaming. So we're going to start with some basic ones. Our first bare minimum setup is a USB mic setup. In that, you just have a USB mic and a webcam going into a laptop or a desktop computer running OBS or XSplit.
Yeah, and OBS and XSplit we'll talk about later, but those are free video streaming options or software, video switching software options that can do streaming. OBS is quite popular. We'll talk about that one as well, and it's free, which is nice. There's a couple of versions of OBS, one that's a little more marketing based, and the other one is the original one that's public domain. And when you start looking at a simple platform like that, what you're looking at is just getting it out the door. USB mics are not the best. They're okay, but if you can avoid them, avoid them. You're much better off with real good mics. Though, if you're doing a simple podcast and you've only got maybe one camera yourself and that's it, they'll work. And if you want to get your message out there, you could even use a phone if you wanted to. You could. So that's our simple configuration. Bare bones. It might be a good way to start. If you've never done this before and you want to start real slowly, that's one way to do it. But if you've got a little more guts and you really want to get out there, Harold will tell you about the next one.
Well, our next one is actually another one of these more basic ones. It's just a audio only one with one mic. It's similar to the previous one, but this is where you don't even have a webcam. It's just for an audio podcast.
Yeah, and while you may think there's not much to that, audio podcasting is very, very popular. Think of the commuters who go to work. A lot of them listen to podcasts when they drive in. And podcasting is still quite popular. There are tons of podcasts, and some of these could be audio only. Some of them could have video and audio, but in this case, as an audio only podcast, you would be in the company of many good podcasters. There are literally hundreds of thousands of these podcasts, and they work. And if you're a little shy of being on camera, you don't really want to go all the way, you don't want to jump into that water yet, you kind of put your little toe in and you go, it's cold, I'm going to stick to the audio. That's one thing you can do. It's a way to get it out there without having to put yourself out there in your entirety. But again, it's not a bad way to go if that's all you want. You want to talk about things, it's perfect. Now, if you're doing a photo podcast, that's not going to look too good because you won't be able to show much. So think about that, what your subject matter is, and make sure that it fits that audio broadcast kind of paradigm. Harold, what's next?
And our next one on the bare minimum list is similar to the first setup. However, instead of a computer, you're using a dedicated hardware switcher, a small one like a Blackmagic Design ATEM Mini.
Yeah, the nice thing about that is it's a very small, portable kind of switcher. So if you want something you just want to put on a desktop and you want to do some simple switching, maybe you have one or two cameras or two shots of you. You may have a webcam on a laptop. You may have a webcam on a stand, or you could have actually a real camera. That would be a simple kind of setup because those devices let you do the switching and the audio mixing all in one, and they're not that expensive. That little Blackmagic Design ATEM Mini is only about, I think, $200. It's very cheap. And as a result, you don't get every feature on earth, but you do get quite a few features for starting out. There are also standalone units that can do a lot more that cost anywhere between $500 and about $4,000. And they're very good too. They go on your desktop. You can move them around. You do need a laptop to connect to, but other than that, they pretty much are standalone. Harold.
And our next setup is similar to what we are using to record this and what we use for our streaming. It's our first prosumer setup for video streaming. In this diagram, you've got microphones which connect by XLR to preamps, compressors, and mixers. And you've also got lights on light stands, cameras on tripods, and these all connect to your computer, usually a desktop computer, to which you have monitors and reference speakers connected.
Now, this is pretty much a professional setup. Even though we call it prosumer, meaning professional consumer, it's really as professional as anything out there. We are using real equipment. It's not cheap. This is the real professional equipment. We've got professional video capture cards. We've got a lot of things that are definitely professional. And when you set up a studio like this, you're setting up a professional studio. Now, you may not want to spend the money we did on cameras, and you don't have to, believe me. You could go a lot cheaper than what we did, even with some simple cameras. But you do need a camera that can either do HDMI out or can do SDI out. Now, SDI is Serial Digital Interface, and it looks like a mini coax, like kind of cable that goes into your house and you connect your TV into. Same idea. But they're very small. But those cables can run for thousands of feet, so that's a good thing. You don't need it usually, but as long as you can run probably 30, 40, 50, or even 8 feet, you're good. So that kind of setup is a professional setup, and you'll find that it's very, very flexible. Now, let's move on to the next setup.
The next setup is another prosumer setup, but this is for an audio podcast. And here we've got XLR mics. In this case, we are showing them connected to a Rodecaster Pro, and that connects to a laptop or a desktop, which is running a switching software like OBS, vMix, or Wirecast. And connected to the laptop or desktop are speakers or headphones.
Yeah, and the reason we highlight the Rodecaster Pro, it is a small device, not too large, and it is a full recording studio right there, with built-in compressor, limiter, and gate, built-in sound effects. You can add any effects you want to it. It's a great device, and it's about $600. It's hard to beat the price. You can put up to 4 mics on it. You can have people call in from the outside via their phones, and you can tie it to a laptop, which then can go stream right out onto the web. If you don't have a laptop, you can stream directly from it to the web, but strictly as audio. It's a great little device. Now, that kind of setup, if you're only doing audio, allows you to do audio with multiple people. So if you're a single audio podcaster, you're fine. You can just talk to yourself and enjoy yourself. Maybe somebody will be paying attention. If you have 2, 3, or 4 people that you want in a room, if you've ever seen Leo Laporte and and his shows, what he does is they have like satellites, 4 people around a satellite. They have cameras around each person, and everybody has a mic, and they can have a nice conversation with each other, and it looks very professional, or sounds very professional. Anyway, what's next, Harold?
Next, we've got our professional studio. We've got 2 setups here, one using the NewTek TriCaster line and the other using the Blackmagic Design ATEM line.
Now, we don't necessarily call these professional. They do. It's not any more professional than what you might think. In fact, if you go to the next slide, here's our disclaimer. They're not that much more professional than what we're doing. In other words, whether you have a hardware switcher, it's still running software. For example, the TriCaster is running an embedded Windows system. The Blackmagics are running their own system, the ATEMs, and it's probably running a Linux type system. And they still run software. So the hardware, we all have hardware. Harold has a video switcher that we use. It's a little MIDI controller that lets him switch buttons right now. We have about 4 different ones of those. Some are small, some are large. You got hundreds of buttons or just maybe 10, 20, 60 buttons, whatever you're looking at. But a hardware switcher and a software switcher basically still use hardware. There's no doubt. If you're using a keyboard, you're using hardware. So those are just more expensive solutions. If you're looking at a TriCaster, you could be spending between $10 and maybe $40,000. They get pretty expensive. If you're doing an ATEM, you start out at about $1,000 and you can go up to several thousand or more. So you're just buying more hardware. We have the same amount of hardware, but in different devices going into a very large workstation. So it just depends on what your needs are. What we're doing is highlighting different options for you to look at when you're ready to look at. We used to have a TriCaster. We spent $25,000 on it, and while we liked it, we didn't find it provided anything beyond what we already had. So we went back to what we had and sold it. But that's normal. That's just as we go through our discovery process of what we're comfortable with. You're going to go through the same thing on your end. What are you comfortable with? What do you feel works best in your environment, on your budget, and reaching the audience you want to reach?
And that should give you an idea for your gear needs for streaming. In our next section, we're going to give you a tour, a visual tour of our studio so you can see how we have things set up.
We'll see you there.